Rebels have overthrown the Assad regime and chased
relatively peaceful time period.
to this day.
I know, and I've never understood that mindset.
Assad regime has fallen. Who the hell has caused them to fall? How the hell does it happen now? What the hell happens now? From what I understand, Assad and his family have fled to and sought refuge in Russia. David Axelrod had a great joke that Assad went and spent the night over at Tulsi Gabbard's couch, and I'm like, you effing pervert! It's always about stupid sex with you disgusting pervs, and also your comedy is about as good as your political insight. Rebels have overthrown the Assad regime and chased him out of the country. And now what this means, I mean, now you see Netanyahu and Israel talking about going in. I don't know if they're already bombing chemical factories or whatever the heck they're going to do. I don't know who's going to replace Assad. It sounds like it's going to be highly Islamic regimes, which I don't know how you measure levels of badness, but that might not be better than Assad. What do you make of this? Why now? Is this another military industrial complex instigated, subsidized coup to overthrow Assad that they've wanted to do for the last decade plus?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's sort of a decision that was made some time ago that we went from, you had the Ottoman Empire, which controlled most of the Middle East, even if it was kind of weak by the 19th century, that was replaced by, the Brits and the French and everybody getting together in World War I. And the Brits and the French made all kinds of promises. Greater Syria was one of the very original first ever promises made, that was going to be given to certain royal wings within the Arab world that if they would rebel against the Ottoman Empire. Of course, we made competing and conflicting promises to different groups and different people. And the French wanted their piece, the Brits wanted their piece, the Americans wanted their piece. So you have all these competing, conflicting areas of empire making conflicting promises to different groups within the Arab world over a century ago, of which many were promises were not kept. We're still experiencing the fallout from that more than a century later. And part of what the sort of median compromise was by some groups within that realm was that they would have sort of either royalist or secular leaders. And it's secular in the sense that they weren't over the top Islamist in the way that, say, Iran is or Hamas is. And you had some of that in Nasser in Egypt. And Nasser for a while united with Syria. And Assad's father came up under that power regime. And Syria was, you have Kurds, you have different Islamic groups, you have Christian groups that have long been there. So you have and then you have conflicts between there and Lebanon, conflicts between there and Israel, and everybody wanting to dominate the Islamic world. So Nasser wanting to be the leader of the Islamic world. MBS currently wants to be the leader from Saudi Arabia of the Islamic world. The Iranians wanting to be the leaders of the Islamic world. This sort of Islamist mantle claim to power that they have sought out now for over a century, with the backdrop of these various betrayals and empire politics constantly creating conflict in the region. And you had a relatively peaceful time period, all things being considered, for a pretty extended time period from the 60s through the 80s, in the sense of, between Nasser and others in Egypt, the Assad regime in Syria, the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq, the Gaddafi regime in Libya. These were not Islamists. These were not Islamist supremacists. These were people who were even occasionally sporadically critical of various Islamist supremacist mindsets and mentality. And after the end of the Soviet Union, as General Clark talked about, people, the CIA and the rest, decided that they wanted to break up. That was their great opportunity to remove Russia's influence in the Middle East and take over the Middle East and sort of recreate what they created with the Shah back in the 70s and 60s in Iran. And then what we did was unleash we sided with everybody at one time or another, so that there's no bad guy we have not been on the side of. If you want to look up an interesting article, anti-Soviet leader wins in Afghanistan. Go find that headline from the New York Times. Find who the photo is of that Americans were cheering that day. They were cheering, of course, Osama bin Laden. He is the anti-Soviet leader Americans had helped free Afghanistan for. How did that turn out? I mean, Afghanistan, disaster. Libya, disaster. Iraq, disaster. Lebanon, disaster. And now we're going to have Syria disaster. These people can't help themselves. They are thrilled and ecstatic at the removal of Assad. You could be critical of Assad. I mean, the regimes were not known for their kindness or politeness in the way they handled a whole bunch of things, known for torture and other bad treatment of a range of groups. But you always in the Middle East or any place else have to ask, what's the alternative? And it's the number one question our elites don't ask because they don't care.
Well, I mean, what are the alternatives in Syria?
Oh,
Because
they're all Islamic.
ISIS or
They can
Al
go back
Qaeda?
and look. The U.S. State Department, the guy that just is now the head of Syria, was a listed wanted man for $10 million just 8 years ago by the U.S. State Department. He's one of the leading Islamist terrorists in the world. That's who just took over Syria. And that's who our so-called smart people are praising. That's who David Axelrod is praising. That's who the establishment types and the Ukraine lovers are praising. They're praising a known terrorist with one of the most vicious reputations in the world. Now, how did this come about? It came about entirely because the other leader that people forget about in that region that wants to be the Islamic leader of the world. Right? It's been a phenomenon in the Islamic world ever since we seeded the idea to take out the Ottomans. We were the ones that came in and say, shouldn't you be the great Arab leader of the world? Shouldn't you be the great Islamic leader of the world? Why should you be dominated by the Ottomans? Well, guess who it is that wants to restore that Ottoman Empire? It is the one and only President Erdogan of Turkey. This is his group. He's organized them. He's protected them. He's safeguarded them. He's funded them. He's trained them. He's armed them. But it would have not been any chance of success if the US, the UK, and France were not neck deep in this. And this, again, goes centuries old. I mean, the US, UK, and France have been messing around in Syria for more than 100 years. Helped create what is called Syria, what it was called when it was called Greater Syria before that. And we've gone back and forth at who we're going to be buddies and pals with. But the removal of Assad just destabilizes a huge part of a country and remove somebody from that region that has kept stability in that region that otherwise is probably going to now look like Iraq and Libya. So, we're just going to be waiting for the human trafficking centers to be in the center of Damascus, this historically religious city. The Christians are already nervous about what might happen. Most of the Christians have already fled Syria over the years, as they have fled Lebanon much over the years, despite what some people have said in that space. If track it, you'll see otherwise. Same in the Gaza Strip. There used to be a lot more Christians in Gaza than there are today. That isn't because of Israelis, by the way. But it's just a disaster waiting to happen. And now they've seeded this disaster on Trump's lap. That Trump's going to come into a region with Syria. What he has said is he wants the U.S. out of it. Even though he's talking about the U.S. should stay out of it, that's true. But the U.S. has not stayed out of it. The U.S. has been neck deep in it. The U.S. has been all over the place, seizing property, seizing oil, seizing foods, seizing items, bombing places, providing troops, providing intel. Without the United States, they never would have been able to overthrow Assad. And how likely is it that overthrowing Assad will turn out any better than overthrowing Gaddafi or overthrowing Husseini? I doubt it.
Well, and it's not just that. Like they don't have nuclear weapons, but they clearly have chemical weapons and biological weapons. And the argument was who was the actual culprit of using those on Syrians back when there was what I think most agree now was a false flag, or at least it wasn't Assad that had used the chemical weapons on his people. Hypothetically, I mean, these weapons fall into the hands of somebody, and somebody, in as much as Assad was a bad guy, and there's no like downplaying that, he wasn't using those chemical or biological weapons for international terrorism. The same cannot and obviously is not necessarily even going to be true of the entities that will replace Assad and take control over these weapons.
Well, yeah, not only that, you have how the issues are going to be resolved with Iran, which has various militias and proxies at present in Syria, how Lebanon handles it, how Hezbollah handles it. You've got all these. You've created this huge space. So Israel's reaction is, well, now Syria can no longer safeguard their treaties. So we're going to go into the Golan Heights and some of those sections and secure those. And apparently we're part of bombing various places they thought had stored chemical weapons before the other groups could get their hands on it. That's the concern current, as you mentioned. That's one of the concerns is what weapons will they now get The Syrian army has left to Iraq, so I mean that's basically an extension of Iran now. Assad was trying to balance out like his father and try to create a coalition. He was working with the Gulf states and other states. Now that's gone. So that Syria is either going to be in the back pocket of it's either going to be an extension of Turkey or an extension of Iran. That's kind of where we're at currently. Either way, we're probably going to have looting, rioting, crime.
Let me bring this one up here. Yeah. Listen to this.
This is a historic day for the Middle East.
Oh, that's great.
The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus offers great opportunity, but also is fraught with significant dangers. This collapse is a direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah and Iran, Assad's main supporters. It set off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and its suppression. But it also means we have to take action against possible threats.
Oh, yeah.
One of them is the collapse of the Separation of Forces Agreement from 1974 between Israel and Syria. This agreement held for 50 years. Last night it collapsed. The Syrian army abandoned its positions. We gave the Israeli army the order to take over these positions to ensure that no hostile force embeds itself right next to the border of Israel.
Well, there is only hostile forces in Syria, left in Syria.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, for the most part, I don't know what some Assad supporters and some Christian groups and others that are still present, because because of the collapse took place so fast, because the army had imploded without recognition that it had imploded.
Position until a suitable arrangement is found.
Suitable.
Equally, we send a hand of peace to all those beyond our border in Syria, to the Druze, to the Kurds, to the Christians, and to the Muslims who want to live in peace with Israel. We're going to follow events very carefully. If we can establish neighborly relations and a peaceful relations with the new forces emerging in Syria, that's our desire. But if we do not, we'll do whatever it takes to defend the state of Israel and the border of Israel.
It's amazing. If you analogize that to COVID, it's a great opportunity. Temporary measures. We'll just go in and it'll be temporary until it's suitable. And this is gonna. And that,
I know. And I've never understood that mindset. I've never understood the mindset of that Netanyahu has, that anybody that's ever opposed Israel, their removal is a good thing, because it's like, who's going to replace them?
The amazing thing
is, Hussein was not the threat that Iraq is now. Libya under Gaddafi was not the threat that it is now. Syria without Assad is a greater threat to Israel than it was before then. So it's like, how is there anything to cheer here? I'm not understanding that at all. But they've often had this very, at least Netanyahu, short-minded, short sense, short-term sense. This guy's bad, he's gone, that means good. And he's often been dead wrong about that. I mean, just like his promoting Hamas to compete with the PLO and Fatah. I mean, that totally backfired on him. And he just hasn't had to pay a political price for it. But it was clearly a disaster, what it led to. And I think this is another example of that.
It seems unable to share the screen for whatever. The clip is on the internet. Go watch it if you want to see what appears to be someone reveling in the outcome that they've always wanted. He says it's happened because they were so hard on Hezbollah and what's the other one in Israel? Hezbollah and the other terrorist group, Hamas. He says it's because they were so hard on them that Syria has magically fallen.
It was just purely Turkey doing what they wanted to do, and Russia being in a careful position. Now, I mean, granted, clearly Assad, there were issues with how he had managed and how his father had managed the government. I mean, that big part of Syria's problems are of Assad's own making. No doubt about that. But without all the foreign intervention, the Assad regime would still control Syria.